Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. And today I'm going to talk about the mighty Halo of Flies from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and one of the greatest aggro-punk bands of all time. It was really interesting reading Tom Hazelmeyer's bio. He was born in Michigan and raised in Minneapolis. And then during his youth, he performed in a foundry and then performed in several punk bands during his free time. In 1983, after becoming disenchanted with the underground punk scene, he enlisted in the Marines, and he ended up living in near Seattle, Washington, and where he was stationed. And then he established his own label, Amphetamine Reptile Records, with the intention of issuing albums by his band Halo of Flies, who had already been turned down by several labels, which is pretty interesting. Tom Hazelmeyer started Halo Flies and the label Amphetamine Reptile Records, and both are equally legendary. And my introduction to the band was just going to Fallout Records here in Seattle and seeing singles by this band, Halo Flies, and picking them up. And then I spent the next several years buying every single I could find on Amphetamine Reptile Records. We had the grunge scene here in Seattle, but in Minneapolis, in the Midwest, they had a bunch of aggro noise bands that everyone's familiar with now. I would imagine the roster of bands on that label is astonishing and just great stuff. So I knew every time I bought an Amphetamine Reptile record, singles, they were going to be great, and they were. And I saw a lot of those bands live too. But Halo Flies, I kind of discovered a little bit later. They existed from 1986 to 1991 in their original incarnation of Tom Hazelmeyer on guitar and vocals, John Anglin on bass, and Tim Mack on drums. And they released their first couple singles, and they were really rare right off the bat. So I wasn't able to get those for years. Rubber Room in 1986, Snapping Black Roscoe Bottles in 1986. But then after that, the singles were rare, but I managed to snag them. Circling the Pile in 1987, Richie's Dog in 1987, Four from the Bottom cassette in 1988, and Garbage Rock 12-inch in 1988, which has the epic Headburn on it. Incredible. So by that time, I was a total diehard fan, and then they came out with the Garbage Burn 12-inch in 1988, No Time single in 1988, Death of a Fly in 1989, a compilation of all the singles called Singles Going Nowhere in 1989, single Winged in 1990, and the Big Mod Hate Trip in 1991, and then the Mod Showdown single in 1991, and then another compilation of all their singles, including the later ones, called Music for Insect Minds in 1991. And first of all, I got to hand it to Tom Hazelmeyer for not putting out albums. They pretty much put out all singles. And now we have two compilations that have most of the singles on them, although there are a number of things that showed up on compilations like that haven't showed up on these compilations, unfortunately, but still. So that's great. I love the fact that's so punk rock to just put out singles and don't put out an album. And then now we have these compilation albums that have all the singles. So which is also great because now you don't have to go out and get all these rare singles. You can get an album that has all the singles on them. And for a record like Music for Insect Minds from 1991 to not be an album, but just a collection of their singles, it's just staggering. It all holds together really well. All 2-3 minute bursts of incredible energy. And so, how to describe Halo Flies? I mean, I call it aggro-punk because it certainly wasn't punk. It certainly wasn't grunge, but just unbelievably ferocious. Tom Hazelmeyer's guitar was just frenetic and shredding and sparks flying all over the place, just as intense as it could be, especially compressed into 2 or 3 minutes. And then his vocal style was like some kind of angry insect. I don't even know how he got that sound out of his voice, but it matches the band perfectly. But what a track record! All these singles together, um, just so astonishing in intensity and frenzy. And one of the things I especially like about them, and is kind of their hallmark, is just how incredibly frenzied they are. I mean, you can barely hear any other bands that that felt quite as out of control as they did. And so, really one of a kind band. That's really saying something, considering all the bands that were coming out back then. They still stand alone. And then in 2007, they reappeared as HOF. And in 2008, they released New Kind of Hate. Um, when I'm Dead 2008 with Lydia Lunch, the FTW EP in 2008, the Gay Witch Abortion Sessions in 2009, Resurrecting a Bad Idea LP in 2010. And boy, you go from Halo Flies to HOF, and I know it's essentially some sort of continuation, but HOF is just beyond brutal. Halo Flies as HOF became this unbelievable industrial beast. There's things going on there I can't even figure out. They're so dense and so heavy and so thick and so insane. And at this point, his vocals have turned into some, I don't even know how to describe it. A lot of times they're filtered through effects, and his previous insect howl has become this guttural, intense, unspeakable horror. And the music's to match. And I have to imagine that after putting out all those records on Amphetamine Reptile Records, with all these heavy, strange, agonizing, punishing, brutal bands, which I love, by the way, the fact that he outdoes all of them, it's almost like he absorbed the spirits of all the other bands that he'd worked with. That's one of the other beautiful things too. Of course, he's got the Amphetamine Reptile record label, and a lot of records by other bands he gets to play on, and so he gets to sit in with a lot of these other really heavy, intense, weird bands. So my hat's off to him for having that opportunity and taking advantage of it. And as I pointed out, his guitar style was so frenetic and so punky and so aggro and so frenzied and so out of control with Halo Flies. But by the time he gets to HOF, it's grindcore. It's a total nightmare. The sounds that he squeezes out of that guitar, it makes heavy metal sound like a bunch of pussies. And the other beautiful thing, of course, he's ran this wonderful label, Amphetamine Reptile Records, since the 80s, and they continue to put out records. And the artistry involved of these limited edition releases he puts out, I have nothing but respect for his artistry and his aesthetic taste, and all the records and all the bands he puts out, including bands we know like Mudhoney and the Melvins, etc. But the stuff he puts out, it really is art for our time. And so my hat's off to Tom. I know Tom a little bit. We're connected and we've talked before through cyberspace. Hi, Tom. So just a consummate artist. I understand he's quite a curmudgeon, so we'd probably get along really well, because I'm kind of a curmudgeon with a bad attitude sometimes, and I definitely like the same kind of music he does. And but just all around, as far as the punk, aggro, grunge scene in America, he is a towering figure. And the fact that he runs this wonderful label, supports all these amazing bands that probably wouldn't have opportunities a lot of other places, and that he runs that label. And then he's got the time to put out these astonishing records. I got nothing but respect for him, and I fucking love Halo Flies, and I fucking love HOF. And as I pointed out so many times in this video, they really are one of a kind, and that's saying something in the pantheon of noise bands that are out there. So Halo Flies, they're definitely not for everybody, but if they're not for the timid by any stretch of the imagination. But if you think you're ready for it, I'm putting a bunch of posts below. I'll post the Halo Flies album. There's actually a vinyl album of their very first live show. There's a handful of live video clips, and then there's a bunch of HOF material that'll make you wish you were never born. So anyway, I know I'm a child of the 60s and 70s and raised on classic rock and obscure rock and that sort of thing, but I definitely was ready for punk rock when it came out in the mid 70s, and then I was definitely ready for the grunge scene and was part of that. And then I was definitely ready for all the aggro-punk noise bands that came out of the Midwest that Tom Hazelmeyer championed. So, Tom, you're a big hero to me. I love you. So there you have it. Halo Flies if you think you're man enough. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.